The sound of 7 war drums stopped, being interesting around hour 4. By hour 7, they had become white. Noise, by hour 11 they were the sound of sleep. I was not supposed to be sleeping. The Galactic Council's Grand Chamber held 4,000 delegates from 31 species, and every single one of them was watching the Cathara High Speaker read from a scroll the length of a landing strip he had been reading for 3 hours. His voice rose and fell like weather. Behind him, 12 ceremonial horn blowers in crimson armor released coordinated blasts every time he reached a new grievance. There were 847 grievances. My seat was in the human delegate box, elevated, visible, positioned so that every species in the chamber could see the human representatives face during moments of historic consequence. The designer of this chamber had clearly expected that representatives would be awake during moments of historic consequence. The designer had never met me. Priya's elbow caught my ribs before my head could fully drop. Ambassador, he's on grievance 400. Good, wake me at 800. The thing about diplomatic summits is that the ones that matter never look like they matter until the last 30 seconds. I had sat through the Selen border crisis, which lasted 9 days of speeches before resolving itself in a single handshake. I had sat through the Marin Accords, which looked nothing like a crisis right up until the moment it became the worst thing I had ever seen. I had learned something from Marin that no briefing document had ever contained. The loudest rooms are almost never the dangerous ones. The Cathara High Speaker's voice cracked. On grievance 512. He gripped the scroll tighter. His color plates, which lined his jaw and neck, had turned a deep violet red, which the briefing document told me indicated maximum ceremonial gravity. Behind him, the horn blowers inhaled. I shifted in my chair and found a better angle. Priya made a small sound that was not quite a word. The thing about Priya was that she had excellent instincts and absolutely no ability to hide them, and the sound she was making now was the sound she made when something was happening that she did not have the vocabulary for yet. I had heard that sound 4 times in my career. Twice it had meant very little. Once it had meant a trade route adjustment that took 3 years to fully untangle. Once it had meant Marin. I opened one eye. The High Speaker had reached the end of the scroll. The far end of it was on the floor, and it stretched back across the stage in gold-embossed panels, each one the width of a door, and the whole of it formed a declaration that had been 3 planetary cycles in the drafting. The horn blowers blew. The chamber erupted. 31 species made 31 versions of the sound of formal outrage, and the combined effect was something between a natural disaster and a large orchestra tuning all at once. The High Speaker turned to the human delegate box. He looked at me for a long time. I looked back at him with one eye. His color plate shifted, violet, then something darker, then a color the briefing document had not covered. The chamber began to go quiet. Not because someone called for order, because something had broken the expected shape of the moment, and 31 species were all at exactly the same instant trying to figure out what that something was. My translator droid, a Model 7 Seraphax unit named Dot that I had owned for 11 years, leaned forward on its shoulder mount. High Speaker Vretha was asking it said in the low, flat voice it used for sensitive transmissions. Why the human representative appears to be resting. Tell him I'm not resting, I'm listening. With your eyes closed. I'm a very focused listener. The chamber had gone almost completely silent now. 4,000 delegates, not one of them had expected this. The Cathara had spent 3 planetary cycles preparing a declaration of war. The horns, the scroll, the color plates, the 847 grievances, all of it designed for maximum psychological impact on the receiving party. The receiving party had been asleep for most of it. I straightened in my chair. I looked at the high speaker. He was still the color the briefing document had not covered. Priya leaned close. Her voice was very careful. They declared war, she said. I know. On us, she added in case that clarified things. I know. The whole declaration, formal and binding, under Cathara war law, the scroll reading constitutes the legal act of Priya. Yes. I know. She was quiet for a moment. What do we do? I looked at the high speaker. He had composed himself. His color plates had settled into the formal gray of someone waiting for a response. All 4,000 delegates were waiting. The horns were silent. The scroll lay on the stage floor like a very long accusation. I stood up. The human delegate box was positioned for visibility, so when I stood, everyone saw it. I straightened my jacket. Tell High Speaker Vretha, I said too, that the human delegation acknowledges receipt of the declaration and will respond through proper diplomatic channels. Translated. The High Speaker's color plates moved through 3 shades in under a second. I sat back down. That's it, Priya whispered. That's it. They declared war and you said acknowledged. I said we would respond through proper channels. When I looked at the scroll, 847 grievances, most of which I had already read in the preliminary reports, several of which were legitimate, a few of which were deeply creative, and one of which, grievance number 308, I had been expecting for approximately 4 years. Give me the evening, I said. Priya looked at me the way she always looked at me when she could not tell if I was being serious or if I had simply run out of words to indicate how serious I was, which was a look she had been perfecting for 6 years. The whole evening, she said. Maybe a little into the morning. The chamber was still waiting. High Speaker Vretha was still standing at his scroll. 31 species were still trying to recalibrate around the fact that the human ambassador had apparently received the most elaborate war declaration in Cathara history, the same way most people receive a bill they were expecting. I looked at Priya. Get me coffee, I said, the real kind. We're in a war declaration, which is exactly why I need coffee. She got up. She always got up. That was why I had kept her for 6 years. I looked back at the high speaker. He was still watching me. His color plates had settled into a shade I recognized now because I had seen it on other faces, human and otherwise, over 23 years of this work. It was the shade of someone who had prepared for every possible response and received none of them. The delegate lounge on level 7 smelled like recycled air and something that wanted very badly to be coffee. I was on my 3rd cup. The emergency recess had been called. within 20 minutes of my response. Protocol required it when a war declaration is received without the expected counter ceremony. The entire procedural framework of the Council requires a pause to determine what step comes next, because nobody had written the rule for this particular situation, which meant that every legal attaché from 31 species was now in a room somewhere on the station arguing about it. I had the lounge largely to myself. The grievance scroll had been replicated and delivered to my table in document form, 32 pages, single column, dense formatting, the kind of document that was meant to be overwhelming and largely was. Most diplomatic delegations would have had a team of 12 working through it. Color-coded notes, legal cross-references, strategic assessments. I had a pen. It was a good pen, a Montrose model, matte black, weighted properly, the kind you could hold for 4 hours without noticing. I had owned it since my second posting, when a sell-and trade negotiator had given it to me after we had spent 11 days across a table from each other, and I had not once raised my voice. He had said, "This is for someone who understands that silence is a complete sentence." I had used it every day since. I clicked it open and started at page 1. Priya came back with a second chair and her own tablet and the particular expression she wore when she had accepted that things were going in a direction she had not planned for but had decided to get in front of anyway. The Council's legal team is arguing about whether a war declaration requires an alert state in the receiving party to be binding, she said, sitting down. What does Cathara war law say? It says the declaration must be witnessed. I witnessed it with your eyes closed. I heard every word. She looked at me. You were asleep. I was resting my eyes. You were snoring. I clicked my pen. That's a strong word. Ambassador. I was breathing audibly. It is a medical distinction. She made the sound again, the one that was not quite a word. Then she opened her tablet and started working through the legal cross-references, because whatever her feelings about my breathing habits, Priya understood that arguing with me was a longer project than simply doing the work. I went back to the scroll. Grievance number 1 was a border marker dispute that had been ongoing since the Marin Accords. I read it carefully. I wrote one word in the margin. Sure. Grievance number 2 was a trade route priority claim that the Cathara had raised 3 times in previous sessions, and that had been tabled each time by coalition vote. I read it carefully. I wrote one word. Fine. Grievance number 8 was slightly more interesting, a claim about a human military vessel's presence in disputed space during a period when it should not have been there. The dates were specific. I recognized the dates. I wrote nothing in the margin for grievance number 8. I put a small dot and moved on. By page 12 I had annotated 6 grievances. 3 of them were one word. 2 were 2 words. 1 was a question mark, which was my handwriting's way of saying I needed more information before I could form a thought about it. Priya, who had been watching from the corner of her eye, finally said, "You have been through 300 grievances. 314. And you have written 6 notes. 7 if you count the question mark." What does the question mark mean? It means I have a question. She looked at the scroll. She looked at me. They wrote 847. Grievances. I know. 3 planetary cycles of drafting. I know. And you are going to respond to 6 of them. I clicked the pen. 7 maybe. Priya exhaled through her nose. It was not quite a sigh. It was the sound of someone who had given up on the idea that the world was going to make sense in the next several hours and had decided to be useful instead. That was her best quality. I had told her that once. She had not seemed particularly pleased. The lounge stayed quiet. Through the viewport on the far wall, the station's outer ring was visible. Docking arms extended, ships from 31 species, various states of activity. I watched the Cathara carrier adjust its position in the dock. It was a warship, a real one, not ceremonial. I had looked up its class in the briefing document 3 days before this summit. It was fast for its size, well-armed, and had been in 3 engagements in the last decade. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went back to the scroll. He appeared at the lounge entrance at the 2-hour mark. Young, that was the first thing. Young, in the way that made him look like he was wearing a uniform that had not fully decided whether he belonged in it yet. His color plates were a pale, uncertain blue, the Cathara equivalent of nerves. The briefing document had told me his rank insignia identified him as a junior diplomatic attaché. He stood at the entrance for a moment as if the lounge itself might tell him whether he was allowed to enter. I waved him in. He crossed to my table carefully, as if the floor might have opinions about the speed of his approach. He stood across from me and said something that translated in real time. Ambassador Vasquez, I am Rintokai, 3rd-tier attaché to the Cathara delegation. I was asked who I came to ask. He stopped. I waited. Are humans afraid? He said. It was a direct question, more direct than anything I had heard in the chamber. All day, he had the look of someone who had prepared a longer speech and then in the moment decided that only the center of it mattered. I looked at him. He was maybe 30 by human reckoning. His color plates were cycling through that uncertain blue. He needed the answer to be yes. I could see it in the way he was holding himself, the careful posture, the prepared face, the whole architecture of someone who had built story in their mind and needed one fact to hold it together. The fact he needed was that humans were afraid. I thought about what I knew. I thought about the carrier in the docking bay, which was fast and well-armed, but which had certain limitations I was not going to discuss in this room. I thought about what had happened at Marin and the choice I had made and the thing that had not happened after that choice because of what I had authorized. I picked up my coffee. Sit down, I said. He sat carefully. I poured him a cup from the carafe. Coffee was terrible. It was the worst available approximation of coffee on the station, made from whatever bean adjacent material the supply chain had provided, and it tasted like someone had described coffee to a machine, and the machine had done its best. He looked at the cup. I pushed it toward him. Drink that, I said. He looked at me. His color plates had shifted. No longer uncertain blue. Something more watchful, something that was trying to read me the way junior people always try to read people who have been at this longer than they have. It will be the worst thing that happens to you today, I said. He did not drink the coffee, but he did not leave either. He sat there and I went back to the scroll and the lounge stayed quiet, and Outside the viewport, the Cathara carrier held its position in the dock, and I thought about how young he was and how the answer to his question was not yes or no, and how some answers take a whole career to say correctly. I wrote the question mark in the margin of grievance number 412. He watched me write it. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means I have a question. About that grievance. About several things." He was quiet for a moment. "The high speaker believes your reaction. In the chamber was an insult," he said. "What do you believe?" His color plates shifted again. "Something close to purple, I do not know what it was. That," I said, "is more honest than your high speaker." He looked at the coffee. He did not drink it, but he put his hand around the cup the way people do when they want the warmth without the commitment. I kept reading. The document took 11 minutes. Priya timed it, she told me this afterward with an expression that suggested she had not expected to be timing things and did not know what to do with the number. I wrote it in the lounge on the same table where I had finished annotating. The scroll itself was pushed to one side. It had taken them 3 planetary cycles to write. I had given it 2 hours and 20 minutes, which felt proportional. Priya had moved her chair closer when I started writing. She had tried to be subtle about it. She was not subtle about it. You could start with an acknowledgement of the formal process she offered when I had been writing for about 3 minutes. I kept writing. Some delegations open with a statement of intent just to set the register. I kept writing. The Vorath delegation always opens with a statement of Priya. Yes, I know what the Vorath delegation does. She was quiet for 40 seconds. I counted. "What register are you going for?" she said. "Accurate." She looked at what I had written. I could see her processing it, the way her eyes moved, the small still place around her mouth that appeared when she was working hard to not say something. "That is very short," she said. "It is. For a response to a formal war declaration. Yes. There are 5 points. There are." She read the 5 points again. I watched her reach point 3. The small still place around her mouth got more specific. "Is this?" she started. "Yes." "Are you sure about?" "Yes." She read point 5, just the one word. She read it twice, then she set the tablet down and looked at the viewport. For a moment, where the station's outer ring was still doing what it had been doing, and the ships were still where they were, and nothing visible had changed. "Okay," she said. That was all she said. The formal reading took place in the full chamber with all 4,000 delegates present, which the council protocol required for any official response to a declaration of war. High Speaker Vrethka stood at the front of the stage. His color plates were the formal gray of ceremonial procedure. I sat in the human delegate box. I had brought my coffee. The council's chief translator, a Selan named Oravith, who had been doing this job for 40 years and who had the face of someone who had heard everything and been surprised by very little, stood at the central podium and began to read. Point 1 was a formal acknowledgement of the declaration's receipt, standard language, clean, nothing unusual. The chamber listened with the particular attention of 4,000 beings who know they are witnessing something that will be in records for a long time. Point 2 was a notice of partial Acceptance regarding 3 of the 847. Grievances, specifically numbers 1, 2, and 308. 3 grievances out of 847. The chamber did not react visibly, but I could feel the shift in attention, the way you can feel a room temperature change before you can name the number. Point 3. Oravith read it. He read it the way he read everything, careful, measured. Exact. He was a professional. He did not pause. He did not change his tone. High speaker Vrethka sat down. Not slowly, not dramatically. He sat down the way people sit down when something has gone out of their legs. Without warning, he sat down and stared at the podium, and his color plates moved through 4 shades and under 2 seconds. The chamber noticed 31 species watched the Cathara high speaker sit down in the middle of a formal proceeding in process, what had been said, and 31 species made 31 different calculations about what point 3 must have contained. I drank my coffee. Point 4 was a proposal, specific, detailed, grounded in the 3 accepted grievances with a resolution framework that addressed the border marker dispute and the trade route claim and the issue of the vessel in the disputed space on those specific dates that I had written nothing about in the margin, because there are some things you do not put in margins. By the time Oravith reached point 4, the chamber had gone very quiet. Not the silence of shock, the silence of attention, the silence of 4,000 delegates recalibrating. Point 5. One word. Oravith read it. In the front row of the Voth Dominion section, a 7FT ceremonial warcrier sat, holding his proclamation banner. He had been holding it for the full proceeding. He had brought it because a war declaration response was the kind of event that required the banner. He folded it slowly, carefully, with both hands, the way you fold something you respect or something you no longer need. He set it across his knees and did not pick it up again. I watched him do it. I had expected that, not exactly that. Not the banner, not the specific gesture, but I had expected some version of it from the Voth. The Voth Dominion had their own history with that word. They knew what it meant in a way that required no translation. High Speaker Vrethka stood up again. His color plates had settled. He was composed. He was professional, and whatever he was feeling, he was good enough at this work to not show it in a room with 31 species watching. He spoke for 40 seconds. Oravith translated. The Cathara delegation requests a 72-hour recess for consideration of the human response. The chamber's chief arbiter, a Marina Cordera Silurian named Pax, who I had known for 16 years and who had the patience of a very old mountain, looked at me. I nodded once. Recess granted, Pax said. The chamber began to empty. Priya came and sat beside me while the delegates filed out. The Voth war crier walked past us with his banner folded under his arm. He looked at me as he passed. His face did the Voth thing, where the jaw scales flattened slightly, which the briefing document had told me indicated recognition. Not respect, not approval, recognition. The distinction mattered. What did point 3 say? Priya asked. When most of the chamber was empty. It said what it said. I know what it said. I read it. I looked at the stage where Oravith was collecting his notes with the same careful movements he used for everything. 40 years of reading other people's words in front of rooms and not one crack showing in the surface. Then you know what it said, I told. Sir. She was quiet for a moment. Did you know it would have that effect? On Vrethka? Yes. How? Because he was in the room at Marin. 2. She went still. He was there. Third-tier observer 15 years ago. He would have been about your age. She looked at the empty seat where the high speaker had been sitting when his legs had stopped cooperating. And point 5, she said. I finished my coffee. Point 5 is just a fact, I said. I stood up and gathered my things and we left the empty chamber, and behind us, the grievance scroll was still on the stage where the Cathara had left it. Gold embossed panels spread across the floor. 847. Grievances in the formal language of a species that had spent 3 planetary cycles preparing for this day. 3 of them had been acknowledged. 1 word had been enough for the rest. 72 hours is enough time to sleep properly, eat twice, and remember what your hands feel like when they are not holding a pen. I did all 3. The station had a civilian sector on levels 2 through 4, shops, a small park with artificial sunlight, 3 restaurants that had nothing to do with diplomacy and everything to do with the fact that people need to eat regardless of what their governments are doing. I found a place on level 3 that served something close to rice and eggs, and I ate at a small table near a window that looked out on the park, and for 23 minutes I did not think about anything that mattered. This is a skill, not a natural one. On my first posting, I had a supervisor named Gilmarch, an old-school diplomat who had survived 4 administrations, 2 constitutional crises, and 1 very bad haircut that he had maintained through sheer force of will for 30 years. And Gil had told me something I had not understood until year 8. He had said, the ones who burn out are the ones who cannot find the switch. Job is always on. You have to learn to turn it off, not forever, just enough. I had not believed him at year 2. I had believed him completely by year 8, which was the year after Marin, when I had understood what happens when you cannot find the switch and you keep going anyway. I ate my rice and eggs. The park had 3 children in it, running between the artificial trees, with the specific energy of children who do not know or care that 42 floors above them 31 species were in various states of war preparation. I watched them for a few minutes. Then I paid for my food and went back to my quarters and slept for 7 hours without interruption. When I woke up, it was the 3rd morning of the recess and I called home. The delay was 14 minutes each way. This is the particular shape of distance in space. You send a sentence, and then you wait 28 minutes for the answer, which means every conversation is a structure of patience, long pauses, words floating across the gap like letters written to someone you hope is still there when they arrive. My daughter Nina was 17. She had her father's eyes and my inability to say something in fewer than 4 words when 2 would do, which she had inherited the wrong way around. She used it to say more than she meant, where I used it to say less. I told her I was fine. She told me she had a presentation at school about orbital mechanics. I told her she would do well. She asked if things were complicated where I was. I said not really. She said, Mom. I said they rarely are. She said okay, the way she said okay When she did not believe me but had decided to let me have it, she was good. At that, better than she knew. I said, go to your presentation. She said, it is not until Thursday. I said, then go do whatever you do. Until Thursday. She laughed. It lasted about 2 seconds. Across 14 minutes of space, and I heard it on the other side of the delay, in the quiet of my quarters, and it was the best thing that had happened in 3 days. We said goodbye. The call ended. I sat with the silence for a while. Then I put on my jacket and went for a walk. The station's main corridor on level 5 ran the full circumference of the habitat ring, long enough for a proper walk, wide enough that you could move without feeling crowded. I had walked it twice already during the recess. It was good for thinking, which sounds contradictory, but the body moving gives the mind something to do with itself. That is not the problem directly in front of it. On level 5, every delegation had a suite of rooms, and every suite had a door, and behind most of those doors, the sound of urgent activity was audible, even through the insulation. Raised voices in 6 languages, the specific rhythm of large groups making decisions under pressure. I walked past the Kithara suite, quiet. The particular quiet of people who are working very carefully and do not want to be heard. I walked past the Vorith suite, also quiet, a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a decision, not before one. I walked past the Silurian, the Thessalan, the Dervak, the Thal, the Marath. I was about 3/4 of the way around when the door of the Voreth suite opened and Dak Voreth came out. He was the Voreth ambassador. He had held the position for 18 years, which meant he had been in it before me, and he had been in combat before that. 3 confirmed engagements during the 3rd expansion, which the briefing documents listed in the same dry language they used for everything, though the 3rd expansion was not a dry event. He was tall even for a Voreth, which made him very tall by any other measure. And he moved with the kind of deliberate economy that belongs to people who learned a long time ago that large bodies in small spaces required careful management. His jaw scales were flat, recognition. Posture, he had been there when the war crier folded the banner. He fell into step beside me without asking. We walked half a corridor in silence. Ambassador Vasquez, he said. Ambassador Voreth. We walked a little further. The Kithara are preparing a counteroffer, he said. I know. You know. They called for the recess. They would not call for a recess to maintain a declaration. They would call for a recess to revise their position. He was quiet for a moment. Most delegations would not have read the recess request that way. Most delegations would have been afraid of the declaration. He looked at me. Voreth's eyes were deep, set and very still, the kind of eyes that collected information without appearing to move. Are humans afraid of the Kithara Armada? I kept walking. He waited. That is the 2nd time someone from your side of this summit has asked me that question, I said. The attaché, a pause. He is young. He asked it because he needed the answer to be yes. What do you need the answer to be? I thought about that. I need the answer to be useful, I said. Dak Voreth made a sound that was not a laugh but was in the same family as 1. You wrote 5 points, he said. I did. Point 3. Yes. You knew what it would do to Vrathka. He was at Marin. The Voreth ambassador stopped walking. I walked 2 more steps and then stopped too, and we stood in the corridor outside the Dervek suite while someone behind that door said something in Dervek that sounded like an argument about supply lines. You were at Marin, Dak Voreth said. It was not a question. Yes. In what capacity? I looked at the corridor ahead of us. The artificial lighting was the same quality it always was, designed to approximate daylight, achieving instead the particular flatness of a photograph of daylight, the kind that does not appear in briefing documents, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. And point 5, he said. I started walking again. He fell back into step. Point 5 is a fact, I said. Facts can be weapons. Only if the other party does not know them already. We walked the rest of the corridor without speaking. When we reached the entrance to my level, I stopped. Dak Voreth stood beside me, his jaw scales had shifted, no longer the flat recognition posture, something else. Something the briefing document had a word for, but the word was clinical and insufficient for the actual thing, which was closer to the expression on the face of someone who has been in enough rooms to know the difference between the people who talk about what they have done and the people who simply know what they have done and carry it the way you carry anything heavy without making a performance of it. Your response document, he said. 5 points. 5 was enough. The Cathara will want more acknowledgments, more concessions in the language, even if not in the substance. They can want that. Will you give it to them? I thought about Gil Marsh and the switch. I thought about the rice and eggs. I thought about Nina's laugh. Traveling 14 minutes across a gap. On 3 of the 847 points, I said, yes, I will give them the language they need. And the rest? I looked at him. The rest, I said, they already know. The answer to, they have known it since Marin. Point 5 is just a reminder. Dak Voreth held my gaze for a moment. Then his jaw scales flattened again. Clean, definitive, the recognition. Posture settling into something permanent. In Vorath, he said, there is a word for someone who knows the exact weight of a moment and does not add to it. He did not tell me the word. I did not ask. He walked back toward his suite, and I went to my floor, and I spent the last 12 hours of the recess reading a book I had brought and had not found time to open, and when the 72 hours were up, I felt, if not rested, then something close enough to it to function at the level the next few hours would require. Which was the point? That had always been the point. The chamber was different on the 4th day. Not the room. The room was the same. 4,000 seats, the elevated boxes, the gold inlaid floor, the stage where the scroll still lay in its panels because no one had moved it, either out of respect or because no one had been given authority to decide whose job that was. The room was exactly what it had been. The people in it were different. I noticed it in the first 90 seconds. The way delegation sat, the Cathara block who on day 1 had been positioned with the precise confidence of people performing something they had rehearsed for 3 cycles, were sitting in a different configuration, tighter, closer to each other, the unconscious geometry of people who had spent 72 hours revising and were no longer entirely sure of the draft. The Voreth delegation sat the way it always sat. The Voth war crier was present, no. Banner. Priya sat beside me and said nothing. She had learned over 6 years the specific texture of a silence that should not be broken, and this was one. I had my coffee. Pax, the Silurian arbiter, opened the session with the standard language. Reconvening after recess, status of formal declarations, request for floor. From the Cathara delegation. High Speaker Vrathka stood. His color plates were neutral gray. Professional, he had had 72 hours to get there. He spoke for 4 minutes, Ori Veth. Translated in real time, and I listened to both the original, which I understood partially, and the translation, which I understood completely, and the gap between them, which told me the things neither version was saying out loud. The Cathara delegation wished to amend the formal declaration, not rescind, amend. There is a difference, and the difference matters, and the Cathara needed that difference to matter for reasons that had nothing to do with humanity and everything to do with what? A species to step back from a position in front of 30 other species who are all watching and filing it away. You do not become High Speaker without understanding that kind of cost. I stood when Vrathka finished. The human delegation acknowledges the amendment request, I said. We accept the framework of direct arbitration on the 3 identified grievances. We propose that Chief Arbiter Pax chair the initial session. Vrathka looked at me. I looked back. His color plates moved through a single shade, not the uncertain blue of his young attaché, not the violet tread of ceremonial gravity, something quieter, something that had been through 72 hours of its own kind of revision. He inclined his head. One incline, brief, formal, the Cathara equivalent of acknowledged, offered to someone you are no longer trying to overwhelm. Pax said, the amendment is accepted. Direct arbitration to commence within 48 hours. The formal declaration of the Cathara delegation is hereby tabled, pending arbitration outcome. The chamber received this, not with silence, with the specific sound of 4,000 beings releasing something, not relief, not celebration, something more complicated than either. The sound of a shape changing, the sound of a story that had been going in one direction turning, and the adjustment that requires from everyone in the room. The Voth war crier put his hand flat on the empty space on his seat where the banner had been, a small gesture. Private, not for the room. I saw it. I sat down. Priya came and sat beside me while the chamber settled into the procedural language of post-recess administration. The Voth war crier walked past our row toward the exit. He looked at me as he passed, his face did the jaw scales thing, flat, deliberate, the gesture of someone marking a moment they intend to carry with them. That is it, Priya said when he was gone. That is it. The war is tabled. Not over. No, not over. But tabled. Yes. She considered this. For now, she said. For now. She looked at the stage where Pax was already consulting with his team about the arbitration schedule. The gold scroll was still on the floor. No one had touched it since day 1. What happens to the scroll, she said. Someone will file it. 847 grievances, 3 of which will get a proper arbitration. The rest will sit in the record. She was quiet for a moment. That does not bother you. I thought about it. No, I said, 847 grievances, most of which are legitimate in the way that most grievances are legitimate. Someone felt a real thing and found a formal way to say it. 3 of them are the ones with practical resolution pathways. The others needed to be said. They have been said. Now they are in the record. That is not nothing. Priya looked at the scroll. You think that is enough for them? I looked at where Vrethka had been sitting. He had left the stage with his delegation, not quickly, not with any visible emotion, with the measured pace of someone managing the aftermath of something they had spent a long time preparing for and would now spend a long time processing. For now, I said. We took the shuttle home 2 hours later. It was a standard diplomatic transport. Functional, clean, the kind of ship designed to move people from one place to another without doing anything memorable about it. 8 seats in the passenger bay. Priya and I had 5 of them between us, and our luggage had the other 3 because we had been on the station for 11 days and had accumulated the specific debris of 11 days of sustained professional attention. I sat by the viewport. The station shrank as we pulled away. First a city-sized structure of light and geometry, then something smaller, then a bright point, then part of the background. Priya worked on her tablet for about 20 minutes, then she closed it. Can I ask you something? She said. You can always ask. You will not always answer. That is true. She looked at the viewport. Background was stars in the dark between them, which does not change regardless of what is happening in the foreground. Point 3, she said. I know what it says. I have read it. But I want to understand what it did to Vrethka. Why? That specific point. I looked at the stars. Vrethka was a third-tier observer at Marin 15 years ago, young, not in the decision rooms but present on the station when the situation developed. He would have seen the initial phase, the escalation, the first contact failure, the moment when it became clear that a bad situation was about to become worse. And then it did not. Priya waited. The situation at Marin had a very specific trajectory. I said. Everyone present could see where it was going. The analysis was not complicated. Given the variables, military positioning, political pressure, the breakdown in communication channels, the outcome was, by any standard model, predictable. But the outcome was not predictable. No, because of what you authorized. I did not answer for a moment. The shuttle ran quiet, the engines, the low background hum of a system that did not need attention, which is the best kind of system. Point 3, I said, identifies the specific decision point at Marin. It identifies what the models predicted, and then it states in the most precise language available what actually happened instead, and then it states why. Priya was very still. The why is the part that did it to him. Yes, because he was there, he saw the before. He knew the trajectory, and he never understood the why. Nobody outside the decision room understood the why. It was not in any document, it was not in any briefing. It was a fact that had been sitting in a sealed record for 15 years, and Point 3 quoted directly from that record. Priya's hands were flat on her knees, the gesture of someone holding something carefully. You had access to that record. I wrote it. She let out a slow breath. And Vrethka sat down, she said, because he had spent 15 years with his version of what happened at Marin, and in 45 seconds of Orovith reading document, his version stopped being true. Was his version that humans were dangerous? I turned that over in my mind before answering. His version was that humans were unpredictable in ways that could not be modeled, I said, which is a kind of fear dressed up as strategic analysis. Point 3 told him that the decision at Marin was not unpredictable, it was precise, it was modeled, it was chosen specifically because it would land in a way that prevented the trajectory everyone had seen coming. And that made it worse. For him, yes, because unpredictable is a problem you can plan around. Precise is a different kind of problem entirely. Priya sat with that. Outside, the stars were doing nothing in particular. This is one of the honest things about space. It has no response to what happens inside it. It simply continues. Whatever you are carrying, whatever you have just come from, the background remains the same background. I have always found that useful. And point 5, Priya said, had been waiting for her to come back to it. She had been building toward it for hours, in the way that careful people build toward the thing they actually want to know, approaching it from other angles first, reducing the surrounding uncertainty until the central question stands alone. She was good at that, better than she let herself admit. You said it is just a fact, she said. It is a one-word fact. Yes. That made a 7-foot Voth war crier fold his banner. Yes. And made Dakvoran stop walking in a corridor. I looked at her. She looked back. He came to find me, she said. During the recess, he wanted to know what you were like in the sessions. I told him. You were focused, he said in Vorath. There is a word. He did not say the word. He said you would know it if I told you. I turned back to the viewport. He is generous, I said. What is the word? It is a Vorath concept, no clean translation into standard. The closest approximation would be something like the quality of knowing the exact measure of a thing and neither overstating it nor understating it, because both are a kind of dishonesty. Priya was quiet for a moment. And point 5, she said. I looked at the stars. The Voth Dominion fought us, I said. 40 years ago, before the Council. Before the Marin Accords, a real engagement, short, the snorts kind of thing that does get long chapters in the history books because it was over before the books could start. I know, I have read the histories. The histories have most of it right. They have the dates, the positioning, the decision to disengage, what they do not have, what the Voth have not mentioned in any formal context in 40 years is what they saw during that engagement that made them choose to disengage. Priya had gone very still. 0.5 is one word, I said. That word is the name of what they saw, not a weapon, not a military classification. A name for a specific capacity, one that humanity developed in the specific conditions of that engagement in real time in a way that no species in the Council had seen before or has documented since. What capacity? The capacity to change the shape of a situation so completely, so quickly, and at such low apparent cost that the opposing party cannot reconstruct when or how it happened. The Voth saw it They disengaged not because they were losing by any conventional measure. They disengaged because they looked at what was happening and could not find the mechanism, and not being able to find the mechanism was, for them, the only answer they needed. Priya was holding her hands flat on her knees again. The word, she said. In standard it would translate to something like the hand you never see. Move. The shuttle ran quiet. Outside, a navigation beacon blinked. Once in the dark, a small, regular pulse, marking a fixed position in space so that other things could know where they were in relation to it, a reference point, a known thing in a lot of open dark. The Voth war crier knows that word, I said. Every senior Voth officer from that era knows it. When Oravec read it in the chamber, the war crier understood that we knew he knew it, and that we had put it in a formal document on the record in front of 31 species. Not as a threat. No. Just as a fact. Just as a fact. Priya let out a breath that was very long and very slow. And the Kethara, she said, Vrethka, did not know the word. No. But he saw the war crier fold the banner. Yes. And he understood that whatever 0.5 said, it was the kind of thing that makes a Voth war crier fold his banner without being asked. Yes. And that was enough. That was enough. The navigation beacon blinked again. Behind us, smaller now and then gone. And the background was clean dark with stars in it and nothing else. Priya sat for a while without speaking. I watched the viewport. The nap, she said finally. I waited. In the chamber on the first day. Yes. She looked at me. Her expression was the one she used when she had worked something through to the end and found the shape of it and was deciding whether saying it out loud would change anything. Were you actually asleep? She said. The pause was its own kind of answer. Long enough to hold the question, long enough to hold what the question was really asking, which was not about sleep. It was about whether any of it had been what it looked like. The Kethara spent 3 planetary cycles preparing that declaration, I said, every element calibrated for maximum psychological impact on the receiving party, the scroll, the horns, the color plates, the 847 grievances. All of it designed to produce a specific response to make the human delegation feel the weight of it, the inevitability of it, the sheer size of it. Priya waited. The nap, I said, was the response. She blinked. Not the insult, I said, not an accident, the response. Because the appropriate response to a room that has spent 3 cycles trying to make you feel small is to decline that invitation quietly without making a production of declining it. You close your eyes, you breathe, and when you open them, the whole architecture of the moment has changed because you are the only person in 4,000 seats who was not performing what they expected to see. Priya was very still. And every species in that chamber, I said, adjusted its calculation about humanity in that moment, not because of what we said, not because of what we did, because of what we did not do. You did not take it seriously. I took it completely seriously. I had read every grievance. I had the response document in my head before I sat down. I knew what 0.3 would do to Vrethka. I knew what 0.5 would do to the room. Then, taking something seriously, I said, and performing that you are taking it seriously are not the same thing. The performance is for the audience. The work is for the outcome. Marin taught me that you cannot do both at the same time. When you perform, you stop seeing clearly, and when you stop seeing clearly, you miss the thing that matters, and missing the thing that matters at Marin cost us more than I will put in a document. Priya sat with that for a long time. The shuttle ran on through the dark, and the stars held their positions the way they always had, and somewhere behind us, the station was doing what it had been doing, and the Kethara were filing their amendment, and Dak Voron was writing something in his report that I would never read, and a young Akash named Rinto Kai was sitting somewhere, thinking about a cup of terrible coffee, and a question he had not been given a straight answer to. He would spend some time on that, I knew. The type. It would be good for him. I have one more question, Priya said. Okay. The coffee on day 1, when you told me to get you coffee. Yes. Was that also part of it, the calculation? I looked at her. No, I said, that was just coffee. She laughed 2 seconds, clean and unguarded, the way she almost never laughed in professional settings, because she was too careful and too good at her job to let things out at the wrong moment, and this was the right moment on a quiet shuttle with no one watching. 3 days of accumulated tension. Finding the small door out. It was the second best thing that had happened in 4 days. I turned back to the viewport and watched the dark go by, and after a while the hum of the shuttle became the particular sound of distance, and distance became the sound of a thing completed, and I felt the way you feel at the end of something that required everything you had and came out the other side intact. Not good, not triumphant. Intact. I closed my eyes. The stars kept their positions without needing anything from me. They were good at that. They had been doing it for a long time.